Thank you for holding this hearing, Mr. Chairman. And I'm intrigued by this concept of a rescue team. And it seems like HSI, Homeland Security, is the preferred partner there. And I want to delve into why, because in this Congress, we had an FBI agent sitting right where you're all sitting right now, Steve Friend, and he was working these cases in our beloved Florida. And he was pulled off of those cases to go and take down people's license plates at school board meetings over parents protesting. And so I guess I want to understand best how to assemble the type of rescue team that you're talking about, and then maybe thinking about some of the assets that exist, like at the FBI, in addition to those at Homeland Security. So, perhaps Mr. Cole, Mr. Mattson, your law enforcement experience, you could draw on that and talk about how to assemble the right equities and the right capabilities to attack the problem.
Yes, Mr. Gaetz. So Homeland Security investigation, surprisingly to most people, actually is responsible for more than 60% of child exploitation prosecutions, federal prosecutions in the United States. Traditionally, HSI is actually one of the first agencies to work this crime type. So prior to the internet, this material was smuggled into the country from foreign sources through our ports of entry and through the mails. U.S. Customs Service, which is the predicate agency for Homeland Security investigations, worked those investigations by seizing those materials as they came into the country across our borders. That gives us a legacy and long-term subject matter expertise in this crime type. And so we worked closely with the U.S. Postal Service in that endeavor, and really the FBI didn't start working these cases until much later.
Yeah, but we're in a different era now. As Ms. Cooper's laid out, we've got to follow that digital footprint right back to the source so that we can make these rescues. And I guess I'm a little worried about Homeland Security because I'm holding this Inspector General report that analyzed how they're dealing with the number of unaccompanied children that are coming over the border. And I mean, in 16% of these cases, Homeland Security isn't even doing the documentation for where they're placing children. And we have over 8,000 children that we don't even know where to put them, that are in the custody of Homeland Security now. Mr. Mattson, do you have a perspective on maybe how to pull together the right equities to build the type of rescue team that we're discussing?
Thank you, Mr. Gaetz. As the former task force commander for North Florida, we worked very well with a lot of peer agencies within all the way from the Panhandle down to Rockledge, which was the area that I covered, both from federal and state and local, so between FDLE, FBI, and HSI. And we felt that was the appropriate way to collaborate and to work on these types of cases with the ability to prosecute federally when needed, or at the state level when needed.
And I just think we can, as the subcommittee with oversight over a lot of these equities that they're trying to pull together, we can give them the right encouragement and the right authority to do that. I've also been reviewing this Stanford Internet Observatory report on identifying and eliminating CSAM in generative machine learning training data and models. And I'm sort of interested in how AI interfaces with all this, because the report seems to say it's really troubling when you have these child exploitive materials that are part of the training models for AI, but the report goes on to say maybe it's AI that will help us do what Ms. Cooper is charging us to do and get to the core of the problem. And so, to any of you here, how do you see AI interfacing with both the perpetration of these crimes, but also perhaps the investigations and the prosecutions and the resolutions of them?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that answer. A couple things are really important to understand about AI. You have AI for good, right? So you have some tools that have been developed that are changing the game in terms of being able to find and locate these kids. And it's really important that we allow law enforcement to use those tools. But AI can be used for bad, too. So you have some nefarious people on the web that are taking pictures of your child's Instagram account, your child's face, and they're adding nudity and unclothing those children and then extorting those children. So the times have changed where a child doesn't even need to be taking selfies anymore. They can just have a soccer page or a gymnastics page up, and you have these pedophiles, trolling them and extorting them. The one thing I think that's really important, I think Congress has a role to play in this. There are ways to determine between a fake image and a real image. And that technology needs to improve. It needs to be invested in. There are watermarks that need to be required by Congress. So any company that is developing an AI tool needs to have a type of watermark so that law enforcement, as they're reviewing these images, can really distinguish between the fake and the real.
I'd love to follow up with you on that. Mr. Chairman, I have a couple unanimous consent requests. I seek unanimous consent to enter into the record the OIG Inspector General's report on some of these unaccompanied children at the border.
Without objection.
And I further seek unanimous consent to enter the Stanford Internet Observatory publication into the record as well.
Without objection.
And just, Mr. Tebow, last time I saw you in person, you were beating my Knowles in Tallahassee. So while I know this is a very challenging dynamic, it's good to see you again in person. Go Knowles.
Good to see you as well. I can't repeat the last part, but I guess, sorry, I'm not sorry. I don't know.
Gentleman's time's expired. Now recognize the ranking member of the whole committee, Mr. Nadler, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Madsen, you were once the commander of the North Florida Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. What type of cases did your unit investigate, and what percentage of your cases were related to the identification of child sexual abuse material victims?
So the type of cases that we dealt with was anything that had child exploitation and the internet related originally. But computer forensics, proactive file sharing investigations, also undercover chat type investigations. People may be familiar with the show To Catch a Predator, similar to that type of setup. We did a lot of those investigations, a couple of human trafficking operations as well.
And how many law enforcement officers were under your command, and how many officers were dedicated to the identification of victims depicted in child sexual abuse material?
So the task force covered about 220 so investigators that were connected to the task force at some varying levels of FTE or hours per week. There was a distribution between there of prosecutors and examiners and investigators. Specifically for victim identification, victim ID is sort of a subset of regular investigations. You do what you can as you're investigating a crime, certainly if you have to, if there is a physical victim involved in it. But I would say that we had no people at the time solely dedicated to identifying victims within images or movies that weren't related to the active case that we're working.
No people solely dedicated?
Not solely, no, sir.
Okay. Do you believe that your task force had the resources and funding it needed to carry out its mission, particularly in identifying child sexual abuse material victims?
I believe that we could do a lot more with more resources and more funding. We had the funding we had, and we made do with what we had. And in terms of buying equipment for people, we got the best prices we could to be able to afford as much rollout as possible.
In a perfect world, how much bigger a budget would you want?
For the entire ICAC program or for the MEC budget?
What you do, yeah.
So a calculation was done by another Raven member that put it around $500 million per year.
Compared to what now?
Right now, I think ICACs are authorized at about 60. I believe that we get, the ICACs get about 32, 34 million.
You get about 32, 34, and you could use 500.
That would be to include actual staffing year over year. The problem with grant funding is if it's not certain that you will get it year over year, agencies are hesitant to hire people on its basis.
I see. Why is it important to dedicate investigative resources to identifying the victims depicted in child sexual abuse material?
I believe it's the reason we do the job to begin with.
And what can Congress do to help law enforcement identify victims depicted in child sexual abuse material more often and more effectively, and beyond giving you a bigger budget?
I think the two keys is the ability to conduct more investigations at the front lines. And the second piece is the international and national cooperation.
Well, the first piece means a bigger budget. Does it mean anything else?
Yes, sir. The collaborative effort, like the technology that underlies the way we communicate with the National Center CVIT program, the speed at which we can deliver information and the richness of that information, metadata, files, that sort of thing. And then also the international component that has been mentioned by the other witnesses.
And what harms are created when law enforcement focuses solely on prosecuting offenders rather than identifying victims? What are the benefits of shifting to a focus on victims when it comes to combating child sexual abuse material?
For one, I believe it is our obligation. Certainly the benefit is that we're able to extract that victim from the ongoing abuse that they might be experiencing. But additionally, I believe it is our obligation and the primary reason we do the investigation. And certainly, when you're dealing with file sharing investigations, it's easy to be what we call suspect-centric, because the suspect may not have a relationship with that victim depicted. They're merely sharing and distributing media back and forth between offenders. So it's easy to make that arrest sort of end at that point. But what we are all asking for is there be additional effort and funding given to the ability to follow up on those images. For one, ensure that we can extricate the victims from the ongoing abuse, but also in an organized manner to where every investigator who may identify them later on doesn't re-victimize them with another visit, so that we have a domestic central repository that can track and maintain those identities.
Thank you. And finally,
Gentleman's time has expired. But I'm going to let you ask that last question, Mr. Wray.
What operational changes or resources might be needed to shift from an offender-focused model to a victim-focused model of combating the spread of child sexual abuse material?
Well, to spend the extra time it takes to liaise with other entities, whether at Homeland, FBI, the National Center, or Interpol, it takes additional time. And as you brought up earlier, the lack of specifically dedicated victim identification specialists make it harder for the regular investigator to take time out to do that. When you have a significant backlog, you have other cases.